welcome to Let's Play Gran Turismo 3, episode 73. And we are now going to get on with our next championship event, which is the Professional GT All-Stars. And well, just because this car has my racing number, and it's a car I've not used yet, I'm gonna drive the Pagani Zonda for this championship. And let's now head up to the tuning shop, considering this is now already my fourth attempt of recording this, because I tried to see if I can get lucky with the fields. Also going to get the Stage 2 engine just in case. So, gonna waste no time, gonna put on the Super Slicks because I need those, and I'm also gonna give this thing an oil change. And this will officially be a 3-part championship, because officially this is of course one of the longest championships in this game. Because each of these races are 15 laps long, and it's a 10 race championship. We also get 50 grand if we can win each of these races. And I would imagine by the time I'm done with this, I'll probably have over 2 million credits. Anyways, circuits we are going to are Laguna Seca, Deep Forest, Midfield Reverse, Task Course, Cut Hill, Rome, Seattle Reverse, Route 11 Reverse, Grand Valley Reverse, and Tokyo for the finale, and let's get through this, and hope of course that this time we can get more lucky with the field. Yeah, alright, yeah, I can compete against this, considering this is now my 4th attempt of trying to record this without being challenged too much. So our competition is a Mazda 787B along with a Pagani Esperante GTR1, a Mitsubishi FTO LM race car along with an S2000 LM race car, and at the back we have the GT40. And well, because I have a feeling this will probably help me, as of which I'm going to take off the assists, but ultimately I'm gonna give this thing a little bit more more downforce to see if I can actually get through the corners, and hopefully this car will be easier to drive. So let's get through this. Let's get through race number 1 of the Professional GT All-Stars in my Pagani Zonda race car. Shifting up into second gear, because I don't want to waste any time in making this thing overpowered, and damn it, I hit the GT40. And already getting a little bit of oversteer, but fortunately not as much this time because I have additional downforce, and hopefully this will manage to help me out in my quest of chasing the Mazda 787B. And compared to the Mazda, I'm well off to a good start. Although I'm quickly catching up, of course, to the Mazda. Which I do now have more downforce on the car, which means of course that hopefully this should be easier for me to get through, and already I'm right behind the Mazda, so slowly catching up. I do have more downforce on the car, which means I can of course get through the corners at a steadier pace than I did before, which means of course I can actually control the car this time. And officially, gap is now 1.3 seconds at the present time, even though I'm pretty sure the Mazda is probably going to be my only real competition for this championship. And I cut the corner. But it's fine, because it's only really a two-way fight for the championship realistically. As I anticipated, tyres are already starting to show some signs of wear, which is why I put on the super slicks, and already I am slowly closing in on the Mazda. I'm able to get a stronger interval through the corners than I did before, and at least I can say I am managing, of course, to control the car. So I'm getting closer now to the Mazda. He is not pulling away from me too much at the present time. And 1.25 seconds is now the interval. The Mazda almost spun in the gravel there, but fortunately he was able to keep all four of his wheels straight. Tyres are starting to get warmed up officially, as of which I would say my tyres are now warmed up. I am slowly closing in on the Mazda. Looks as though Corkscrew probably is going to be the best place to make the pass for the lead. But again, I would say in terms of overtaking, I am definitely getting closer and closer now to the Mazda. And this additional downforce setup has definitely been helpful, because I've actually managed to control the car this time with the additional downforce, and ultimately I am now closing in on the Mazda. He is not pulling away from me. I think I might just be able to get this done properly this time, and somebody has spun at Corkscrew, which is more or less what I would have expected to happen, and at the moment I'm closing in on the Mazda. I might be getting more drag than I usually do, but obviously the downforce is helping me get through the corners. I am managing to keep up, of course, with the Mazda, and sooner or later I might be able to get a pass done, and already, as I anticipated through the Corkscrew, I do now get the pass done. Officially, it looks as though I might be able to lead this lap, because I'm on the more durable tyres. And getting some oversteer there for good measure, but even though the Mazda is able to close in down the straights, I'm able to get the advantage through the corners because of my added downforce, and the Mazda has now run wide at the hairpin, and it looks as though it is probably going to be from this point onwards that I will officially manage to hold on for potentially a race win. So, I did of course have to reset the game a couple of times, and I just cut the corner. Accidentally, I might add. But I did of course have to reset the game a couple of times, just to make it so I'm not challenging myself too much, and already I am now starting to extend my interval from the Mazda. Because apparent as it might be, he has nowhere near as much downforce as I have on the Zonda. So, 5 laps are now complete. We still have another 10 to go. I am already starting to eke out a little bit of an advantage now to the Mazda, because of my downforce. the additional downforce has definitely been helpful in making me get through the corners. And at least I can say by now I am managing to control the car. Oh shit! Oh fuck me. Yep, I spun. More or less what I knew was going to happen. Now I have to work to get myself back in position once again. And shifting up into fourth so I don't get a snap of oversteer. And already that was a hugely costly spin. As soon as I thought for sure I was going to get this thing under control, somehow I still had to fuck myself on the way home straight, which oddly enough is something the AI tend to do quite a lot. And it now looks as though I'm going to have to work to get my way back up into the position I need to be in, even though both of us are notably approaching a back marker. And whoever that is, we probably don't know. I've really got to get the hammer down if I'm going to close back in on the master. Or at least wait for him to make a pit stop and I might be able to overtake him. That is a possibility. Or unless it can be blocked by grabbing back markers. And it's the Panos who comes into the pits. And I am now starting to close in on the master again, so powers that might be, the corners are playing of course to my advantage, in spite of me spinning, but hopefully I might be able to catch up to the master before the end of this race if he has to pit. As of which, the corners are helping me out to close in on the master. I just need to make sure I'm not the one who becomes victimised by the corners. But the interval is definitely closing in, as of which both of us have now overlapped Panos for the first time. And I'm slowly closing in on the master, so I'm slowly managing to close in spite of my spin, as of which the master has not officially spun yet. And I'm hoping that he does manage to make a mistake before this race is out, and I'm now a second behind, so I might be able to catch him before this race is done. If he's on worn tyres, and he must have spun there, which could effectively add a course to my advantages, and I now set a new best lap time of a 1:14.8, and just trying to take my time on closing in on the master. I'm not officially in any hurry at the moment. I'm definitely closing in on the master now, because the gap is now 4.7 seconds, as of which my Zonda is managing to close in on the master at quite a vast rate of knots, even though I still continue to cut the corners. But I am slowly closing in on the master. In spite of my spin, and the Mazda must be on worn tyres if I'm closing in up to this point, because it doesn't look like his tyres are going to be holding on for much longer. I am steadily managing to close in now. Gap is now under 3 seconds, so I'm definitely closing in on the Mazda up to this point in the race, and for 2 laps consecutively I set a new PB, so my lap times are really getting faster and faster at the moment. So 2.1 seconds now the interval, so I'm steadily closing in on the Mazda. I would imagine he probably does have to pit sooner or later, judging by the state of those tyres. Must be the only reason why I'm closing in at such a rate of knots. As we now head through the corkscrew here on lap 10, and we still have another 5 laps to go following this one. Gap is now 0.2 of a second. I'm going for a dive, and I now manage to retake the lead from the Mazda. I'm going to suspect his tyres must not be working to the productivity levels they should be working at. Either that or my car is that much faster through the corners. And the Mazda almost made me spin, but I was able to catch it before oversteer kicked in. Looks as though the Mazda also had a little twitch of oversteer there from the rear end. And I do now have the advantage up to this point. And the Mazda dives down the inside, but he goes way too deep, and officially that has now just handed the interval over to me in spite of my earlier spin. And it looks as though from here I might be able to extend my lead. Gap is now 3.6 seconds. So those tyres the tyres on the 787B must be close to dead. So tyre longevity once again playing a part here at Laguna Seca. Either that or it's just because of the AI's incompetence around this circuit. So did of course have to reset the game a few times to get this sort of field, but fortunately I did eventually get lucky with that, and ultimately I'm now starting to pull away from the Mazda at a vast rate of knots as I once again cut the corner before the Rahal straight, because I think I'm turning in too soon. Named of course after... So the Rahal straight, named of course after the IndyCar racing legend Bobby Rahal. So heading through the final corner once again. Looks as though the Esperante is not going to be the only back marker in this event, and not too far off my PB, and whoever is in 5th position is looking like they will certainly be the next one to be overlapped. I think that's the FTO I can see there, so I'm steadily closing in on the FTO from what I can see here. Gap is now 7.7 seconds now to the Mazda, so as long as I don't repeat that mistake I made earlier in the race at about the halfway point, then I might be able to win this race as long as I can keep the car clean and not repeat the mistake I made previously. And... oh Christ. I did not think I was going to save that. Son of a bitch. Anyways, I do now overlap the FTO, who is looking like he must be the 5th placed car, even though obviously he has 4-wheel drive. And the Mazda does now come into the pits after 13 laps of competition, and officially it looks as though these final 2 laps, even if I do spin, are going to be relatively challenged. So 2 laps to go. I can now pretty much run like hell up to this point. The margin has now increased to 24 seconds over the Mazda, and it looks as though up to this point I am officially going to hold on to win race number 1. So the downforce setup really has been helpful, and out of all the times where I thought for sure I was going to spin on the circuit, surprisingly I only spun out on this circuit once, and it does now look as though the Esperante is going to be overlapped twice. The GT40 is now just up ahead, and the Esperante is in the pits once again, and I'm overlapping the GT40 now. So the Esperante is now 2 laps behind myself, since he pitted in for a second time. And this is now the final lap here at Laguna Seca. And officially the margin is now 29.5 seconds to the Mazda, so oh fuck me. In spite of me cutting that corner for another time, obviously, I'm still continuing to gradually extend my interval. So, 29.5 seconds now to the Mazda. I think it's fair to say that this race is well and truly mine, regardless of what happens next. And it doesn't look as though I'm going to overlap the S2000. I might be able to, but nope. I set a PB on the final lap, but couldn't quite overlap the S2000, so he can now pretty much go on his way to eventually finishing 3rd. So I almost lapped the entire field with the exception of the Mazda, and the FTO is now finished. And so let's now wait for everyone else to finish. There he is. And the Honda has managed to finish on the lead lap, as of which I narrowly missed out on overlapping him, and in the end of that race I won by 31.7 seconds over the Mazda, because once he made his pit stop I was pretty much left out there to dominate the rest of the race basically. So 10 points to me, 6 to the Mazda, 4 points to the Honda, 3 points to the Ford, 2 to the Mitsubishi, and 1 to the Pagani. One race down and still 9 to go. Hopefully I can manage to win at least 6 out of... well, just because I want to, I'm going to save the replay. Because this is a 3-part championship. Alright, let's head onwards to race number 2. And where I would imagine we're probably going to be needing less downforce. Actually no. I'll stick with the downforce setup I have for this, because Deep Forest is another course that's more anticipated on cornering rather than speed. So yeah, I'm just going to leave everything as it is, basically, as we get through race number 2 of the Professional GT All-Stars. So I'm going to leave everything the same, because I would imagine that probably will help me. Downforce is helping me here to keep my wits about, and officially the FTO is already sliding. It also makes contact with me as a result of receiving oversteer, but Fortunately, I do manage to come out of the incident unscathed, and as of which I'm now up into the second position once again, and where, since I would imagine Deep Forest probably is another circuit that's hard on tyres, I would imagine it will only be a matter of time before I catch up to the Mazda. So 2.4 seconds, pretty much the margin now to the Mazda, as of which I'm steadily closing in. And just hitting 300 Ks down the front stretch, almost getting a snap of oversteer twice there, in the middle of and on the exit of the first hairpin, and stepping on the brakes so I don't make contact with the Mazda, even though I still do. I slot down the inside, almost making contact there with the inside wall, also having to short shift my way through the gears so I don't upset the balance, and once again the Mazda is right behind me, and officially it now allows me to eke out an advantage in the early stages. I now have a 1.7 second interval to the Mazda. After just 2 laps in this race, I already take the lead here at Deep Forest. There is a possibility for me to say that I probably didn't need the engine tuning on for this race, even though obviously I'm going to keep it on anyway because I'm probably going to be sliding a lot. At the moment, of course, that is proving to be exactly what the case is. So, I might be leading this thing, but obviously I need to focus on balancing the car as well as the setup if I'm officially going to make it look like I can do this properly. Thanks. Anyways, 3 laps are down and still 12 to go, as of which I have now eked out an interval to the Mazda after 3 laps, trying to keep my car under as much control as I can, and gap is now up to 6.2 seconds after 3 laps in this race. I still need to focus on keeping the balance done correctly, and officially gap is relatively even, of course, to the Mazda, as of which I kept the engine tuning on because I would imagine the Mazda probably is going to be a competitor through certain parts of this race. And at the moment the gap is now 3.4 seconds. And at the end of 4 laps, I can now say I'm starting to steadily eke out an advantage over the Mazda as I do a sudden yawn. I'm slipping off my chair. Although there's nothing I can do about that until I finish the race. Still cutting the corner even though I try my hardest not to. And setting a new best lap time of 1 minute 7.8. And the field is a lot closer now here at Deep Forest than it was at... is a lot closer at Deep Forest than it was at Laguna Seca, because oddly enough we do actually have some on-track battles going on in this race besides myself and the Master, as of which we two are clearly going to be the dominators of most of these races from what I can work out. So, pretty much 8 seconds now the interval to the Master, so steadily building up an advantage, as I also set a new PB after 6 laps. 6 laps are now complete, still 9 laps to go. I'm steadily building up my interval by about less than a second per lap. And even though I could have taken the engine tuning off, obviously, it wasn't worth it to take any chances with just the downforce. So I just thought that would be the best decision I could make. And already the Pagani after 6 laps here at Deep Forest is now in the pits. I can safely say that I now have a comfortable interval now to the Master, so I'm able to assert myself and already continuing to eke out a relatively steady interval because of how I'm able to get through these corners at a stronger pace than the Master is. And even though we do have to go to task course to finish off the first part, the truth is I figured if I could win maybe 3 out of the first 4 races, then obviously that is officially where I will of course manage to hopefully put myself into an easy position heading into the halfway point. And it's also because officially I'm just trying to get this over with before I head down south for a week. Even though by the time I've got this video uploaded, many of you will probably not know what I even mean by down south. Anyways, I think it's safe to say that now that I've overlapped the Pagani, I am pretty much almost a pit stop clear of the Master, and I would imagine by the time we get to the end of this race, that interval will only just increase. So once I took the lead here at Deep Forest, I pretty much managed to dominate, and even though I could have taken off the engine tuning if I really wanted to, the truth is I was not brave enough to take a chance. I was wanting to see, of course, if I could win the first two races, and the odds there might be that's exactly what the case is looking likely to be. And the GT40 once again is running high, but fortunately, for me at least, I am managing to slowly overlap these back markers. So the order at the end of nearly 10 laps now is I am in first, the Mazda is obviously in second, the Honda S2000 is running in third, ahead of the Mitsubishi FTO, as I now go for another PB by 8/10, and I am officially just over 23 seconds now clear of the Mazda, so the interval is basically building up lap after lap up to this point, and I would imagine on this circuit, unlike Laguna Seca, I probably will be able to overlap the S2000, which means of course I do not have to wait as long for him to finish. So steadily closing in now on the S2000. The gap is now 27 seconds to the Mazda, so slowly closing in. And officially, I do now overlap the S2000 successfully. And this is also proving, of course, to be an easier race than Laguna Seca was. Gap is now 28 seconds. I would imagine it's probably going to be more than a minute by the time... Sorry, less than a minute by the time we get to the end of this one, because the Mazda is still yet to pit, unfortunately. And there he is now come into the pits after 12 laps of competition. I would not think I'm going to overlap him, even though officially I can very much say at the very least that I am of course managing to increase my interval at a relatively steady pace, as of which we are now coming up to the end of lap 12 and almost scraping the outside wall, and I can now say I am less than a minute clear of the Mazda, and I don't think it's worth it to overlap him, even though I will still be trying to overlap him anyway, because, well, I want to see how much of an interval I can eke out over the Mazda, as long as I don't scrape. So, overlapping the entire field could be a possibility here at Deep Forest. Even though I would think for midfield I probably will need to go back to my original downforce setup, because ultimately I would know very well that's exactly what I would believe the case is going to be, and I'm steadily continuing to build up my margin to the Mazda, because he is not able to get through these corners as efficiently as I am. The Mercedes-powered V12 engine is emerging over the rotary engine, and as I am still continuing to steadily build up an interval, it does not look like I am officially going to overlap the Mazda before the end of this one. So he does now overlap the Panos, and it looks as though he has been held up by a back marker there, and not far off equaling my best lap time, or even besting it. And officially, it looks as though I might still be able to overlap him if he continues to be held up by these two back markers, although realistically I would imagine it won't be long before he is officially overlapped if the Mazda is going to be overlapped too. Although I wouldn't think of that to be the case, because ultimately I don't think my car is quite powerful enough to overlap the entire field. So I'm not going to go for it. I'm just going to stick with the position that I should be in. I'm not going to try too hard overall, because overall it's still really close. And furthermore, I overlapped the GT40 twice in that event. So let's now wait for everyone else to finish, considering I have overlapped everyone else except for the Mazda. There he is. So both myself and the Mazda have pretty much overlapped the entire field, or at least I've overlapped the entire field once again, with the exception of the Mazda. And officially, it is 2 out of 2 wins to the Zonda over the Mazda. The Mitsubishi is now going to be tied on points. Oh, wait a minute. The FTO is now a point behind the Honda. The Ford has now fallen back to 5th, and as for the Esperante, well, he's just lurking at the moment. But anyways, a perfect 20 points to me so far, and a perfect 12 points to the Mazda. After 2 races, I've won both of them. And let's now head over to race number 3, which takes place at midfield, and where I would imagine this is going to be more of a course based on speed because of the straight lines, and so even though this downforce has been helpful, I would think now probably is the time, of course, for me to lower this. I think that was the right setup, but anyways, race number 3 takes place at midfield reverse. And at the moment, I have basically dominated the first 2 races, and where I would imagine this race will more or less be the same. And Mazda, as I expected, because he starts on the pole for pretty much every race in this championship, I would imagine he is of course going to be extending his lead early, but obviously it will certainly not be long before I catch up to him. The Zonda is now up into 2nd position, of which I need to remember I'm now running with a lower downforce setting, so obviously I have less grip through corners. Braking so I don't hit the wall, and already I can see what the difference is, but I am now up into the 2nd position, as of which I figured of course less downforce would be the way to go, and the Esperante was way too late on the brakes there in comparison to me. He tried to outbrake me, but fortunately that was not going to be the case, because I knew very well that he was way too late even before he got to the corner. And already the gap is now 5 seconds to the Mazda, so I think up to this point I'm going to have to rely on a pit stop to help me out. Here at midfield reverse, because the gap is now starting to increase over the Mazda, but obviously I would imagine tyre longevity will probably play a part once again, and I had a snap of oversteer as I was through the corner, but ultimately I can now say I have broken away from the rest of the field. 2 laps are down, still 13 to go. I am hopeful, to say the least, in saying that I will manage to eventually catch up to the leader. And it looks as though that is not going to be the case, because I think the Mazda up to this point probably has the early advantage, and I was certainly fortunate enough to say that I managed to win the first 2 races. Although I did of course have to take off some of the downforce so that I would not be developing too much drag down the straights. And obviously, for test course I would imagine I'll need to go for minimum downforce, because obviously that is more or less what I will probably need anyways. 3 laps are down and still 12 to go. I'm basically just trying to hold on to this thing as much as I can. Looks as though the Mazda at the moment is currently extending the interval at quite a vast rate of knots. So I guess I'm going to have to wait until his tyres starts deflating, and then hopefully once those tyres do start going down in terms of their wear, then hopefully I might be able to eventually take the lead in this race. Although competing against one of the prototypes has definitely been easier than competing against all 3 of them, which I would imagine is exactly what I'll probably be doing in the World Championship, which of course is going to be coming later. I should not have shifted down to second. Yeah, I think it's fair to say the Mazda has probably got me nailed to the wall in this race, is what me thinks. At least I can say I'm trying to catch up to him, even then of course if he is pulling away at a much faster rate of knots than I am at the present time. Although this is more or less what I was expecting to happen, because I would have known there were going to be circuits where the Mazda was quicker than me, and I did close up slightly on that lap, but overall I would say the Mazda probably has got me beat in terms of overall on-track pace, and I would imagine this probably will be the first race I'll lose, because through these corners he's able to extend his interval, and it does look as though I will not be reliant on the usual AI mistakes that happen, which is basically what usually tends to happen. And unless the Mazda makes a mistake up to this point, I don't think I'm going to win this one. I'm still going to try and go for it because obviously it's what I have to do. Anyways, 6 laps are down, still 9 to go, as I am just holding on to second position at the moment. And officially the gap is now 9.6 seconds on this lap. The Mazda is continuing to steadily pull away, and maybe in some cases I shouldn't have removed all of that downforce. But obviously, I figured since I knew this was going to be a course that was more based on straight line speed, obviously, I figured of course it was necessary for me to remove the downforce, and I'm pretty certain I will have to go for minimum downforce by the time we get to the test course, because the Mazda will almost certainly have me beat the test course unless I put on the engine tuning. And he's already approaching the back marker, so hopefully if whoever the fucking back marker is might be able to help me, then hopefully there might still be a shot of me potentially going back into competition. And somebody just spun there, but I'm doubtless in saying it wasn't the Mazda. No, it wasn't, it was the GT40. And so, officially, it looks as though the GT40 did help me slightly, because I have now closed up on them through that sector. So I'm going to assume tyre wear must be playing a part also in helping me close up to the Mazda, as of which we are now 8 laps into this event, so tyre wear must be playing a part up to this stage in the race, considering we are pretty much halfway through this race now. We still have 7 laps to go before this race is done. The Mazda has clearly looked like the benefiter from this race, and unless he comes into the pits, which I'm hopeful in saying he will pit in before this race is done, then if he doesn't, overall I would say he has probably got me beaten in terms of on-track pace. Even on worn tyres, he can still beat me around this course. Well, I was certainly fortunate to win the first 2 races of this championship, and the gap is definitely closing, but I would imagine it seems unlikely for me to get close enough in eventually catching up to the Mazda, unless I'm able to close up on him down the straight, in which case I would say overall he's pretty much got me beat in terms of track pace. And yep, the interval is definitely closing now, so his tyres must not be working as well now up to this stage in the race, and hopefully it will of course be the pit stops that will effectively help me to take the lead in this race, unless he has over a 15-second margin, which is not the case. I've had to be patient, I've had to wait and see how long it is before those tyres really start wearing off, and it looks as though the effects are starting to speak for themselves. As of which I am now going to overlap my second back marker in this event, which is Escalante. And down the inside I go through the hairpin. He stays behind me, as he should. Since he is a back marker, there's no reason trying to be aggressive with me. And 6.6 seconds now the interval, so I would imagine a win is still possible. There is still a possibility of me saying that I will manage to hopefully win this race. And he's in the pits. The Mazda has now come into the pits after 11 laps. It now allows me to take the advantage, even though I would imagine my advantage is only going to be temporary. Because this is a short pit lane. But dependent on knowing if I'll be able to hold on to the lead or not here at midfield, that, I'm afraid, will remain to be seen. But it looks as though for now I do have the interval over the Mazda, even though he will quickly close in. The rotary-engined 787B will inevitably slice that margin down once his tyres warm up, even though I'm slowly building up an interval at the moment. I would say once those tyres have been warmed up, he will be trying to close down that interval, and evidently sooner or later that's exactly what I think he will do. Pagani is now in the pits once again, and I'm coming up to overlapping the FTO. The Mazda from here looks like he has got his tyres warmed up, so ultimately it is going to be quite a struggle to fend him off for the race win. It's going to be tight. It also depends on knowing what these back markers are going to do. I really cannot afford to bottle this if I want to win this race. This is certainly the closest race that I've been involved in so far. And 10.3 seconds is now the interval to the Mazda, as we are now onwards to the 14th lap here at midfield. The gap now looks like it's going to be closing in, presumably a second per lap. But I might be able to hold on to this as long as I can keep the car straight and not be too greedy with the throttle. As I anticipated, the Mazda is definitely closing in, so he must be setting new best lap times pretty much lap after lap. He's clearly had the car to beat all day in this race. His car clearly looks like the one to beat. And the Honda now goes into the pits, and officially we now start the final lap here at midfield reverse. I'm hopeful to say the least in saying that I will manage to hold on for the race win. I might just be able to do that as long as I can keep it clean. And officially it doesn't look as though the Mazda is going to catch me before the end of this race. It appears as though I should of course be able to hold on for a hat-trick of wins as the GT40 now comes into the pits once again, and officially it is a hat-trick of victories to the Pagani Zonda. And in the end of that, I win by 8.5 seconds over the Mazda because of the tyre longevity, and the GT40 just finished. And so, let's now wait for everyone else to finish. So there we are. I have won 3 consecutive races overall, and won by 8.5 seconds over the Mazda. As the FTO once again finished in 3rd, ahead of the Honda S2000, and the Esperante has once again finished ahead of the GT40. So Italy leads by 12 points over Japan, and then at the back it is the Americans, officially. So the Zonda at the moment has built up a relatively steady and early lead. And now we need to head over to what will probably be the longest race in this championship overall. And then once I've done that, we will officially be done with part 1 of this championship, races 1 to 4. Because we are now heading over to test course, and for this, I would imagine I need to pretty much go for minimum downforce, and I'm also going to increase the speed slightly, and hopefully, if I'm not getting too much drag, that should be enough for me to hopefully put myself in a good position, because we are going 15 laps around test course, and because this course is purely based on speed, obviously I need as little downforce as I can get in order to officially make myself look competitive, even though I'm pretty certain I will not beat the Mazda in this race. But fortunately, however, this low downforce setting is already helping me out, because I am now officially noticing the difference of having a low downforce setting, and at the moment I am running in 3rd, and dependent on knowing how fast the Pagani is in this race, I would imagine 3rd position is probably going to be the best I can hope for. Although since I am running with pretty much no downforce whatsoever, that's basically the main reason why I'm running faster, and I can definitely notice the difference of pretty much having no drag. And oddly enough, the Pagani at the moment is actually proving to be a competitor in this race. So I'm not entirely certain on knowing if I will or won't catch up to the 2 leaders, but at the moment I am looking quick. In comparison to the second half of the field. So minimum downforce definitely proving to be a beneficiary to this point, as the Pagani is trying to go for the lead ahead of the Mazda, and it looks like he could very well do it. And he has done it. The Pagani Esperante has now taken the lead away from the Mazda, and as of which, oddly enough, I am also catching up to these guys, which oddly enough is one thing I did not expect myself to do. Guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens, but there is the possibility of me saying that if this goes on for long enough, I might be able to win this race. considering one thing that is beneficial about test course is the fact I'm saying that is basically the fact I'm saying that yep, the Mazda must be continually hitting the rev limiter, which is why he lost the lead, which is the main reason why I assume he must have lost the lead. The Pagani is currently out in front, so he must have some real speed going into this race. The Mazda at the moment is just continually hitting the rev limiter, which is the main reason why he's not able to stay out in front. And once again, it looks as though for the third time in a row, I am going to be ahead of the Mazda. So the Pagani at the moment, he's pretty much out in the league in the zone at the moment. And it looks as though second up to this point is probably the best I can hope for, because he's currently extending that interval. Still, I did not expect the Pagani to have this much speed going into test course. And other enough furthermore, I did not expect myself to be running in second either. Although I don't think it's going to last. Although, if we're being realistic here, I don't think the Pagani is going to hold on to the race lead too much longer, because he is on worn tyres, and I would imagine that is exactly what will ultimately be his downfall. So, unless he stays out on track, which I'm doubtless in saying he probably won't, then ultimately, I would say overall, he is probably not going to win this race, unfortunately. Although, for me at least, I'm currently running in second position. I would imagine, because the Pagani has been making pretty much more pit stops in this championship than anyone else up to this point, I would say it is not going to be too much longer before he has to concede the lead. Because even though he is narrowly extending his interval, I would say it's unlikely for him to officially hold on to that interval for much longer, because sooner or later he is going to have to pit, unfortunately, and it looks as though ultimately that is going to hand the lead over to me. But again, I knew I had to do some pre-race preparations if I was going to be a contender, and oddly enough, I think I might have hit the nail right on the head by going with minimum downforce and also by increasing the speed. So it would be something if I could win here at test course. But it will also depend on knowing if the Pagani has to pit or not, because judging by what I've seen so far, tyre wear is not proving, of course, to be an issue, but I would imagine it will inevitably become an issue on the Pagani, and then if he does pit in this race, and I'm pretty certain in saying he probably will, that will officially hand the race lead over to me. Officially. And then ultimately overall, that will be exactly how I have officially won the first 4 races. Because pit stops happened. Anyways. Going back, of course, to my race, and the fact I'm saying that the Esperante at the present time is currently continuing to extend his lead. So, unless he comes into the pits, and I'm uncertain of knowing if he will or won't, does remain an uncertainty, but dependent on knowing if he does pit or not, I would say up to this point he's probably going to continue extending his lead. Although, oddly enough, like I said before, I was not anticipating the paint loss to be a contender for this race in the early stages. So the Pagani has definitely got some speed. I think we have definitely established that. And that's all. Although it doesn't affect my speed too much because I wasn't officially expecting myself to dominate this race up to this point. And this is basically the main reason why I hate test course. Because you're basically just going flat out, doing pretty much a shitty oval over and over and over and over and over and over again. Just literally driving around in fucking circles is what this course is. And not even good circles. Or ovals, I should say, because that's essentially what this is. This course is basically even more of a shitty oval than the Talladega Super Speedway in terms of speed. Except for saying that obviously we aren't winning on the restrictor plates. Still have another 9 laps to go after this one. And as I anticipated, this race is certainly, as I thought it would be, the most boring. As I anticipated that would be the case. Yep, the Pagani is now in the pits unfortunately, so that now hands the race lead over to me by default, even though obviously he did of course have the speed to go the rest of the distance, but unfortunately he has had to concede the position. And unfortunately, it looks as though from this point onwards he is officially going to fall back for pretty much the rest of the race, unfortunately. Even though I would imagine the FTO at the moment is probably battling harder than the GT40, because I would think that's probably the S2000 at the back, unless it's the S2000 that's battling with the FTO for 4th position. But again, a tough break of course for the Pagani, because he clearly looked like he had the speed to probably go the distance, but fortunately the tyres disagreed with that statement, and officially that is the main reason why it looks as though from this point onwards, unless his car has more speed than we realise, it looks as though ultimately the win is going to be handed over to me by default, unfortunately. Alright. 7 laps down and still 8 to go. And just as I anticipated, this is proving to be exhausting. Also, furthermore, if anyone's asking me what these bankings remind me of, they basically remind me of the oval section at Monza. You know, that old oval section they used to use as a part of the road course because they could. But that's basically what I think these bankings remind me of. They basically remind me of the old Monza bankings they used to use up to the early 60s, but obviously they closed that part of the circuit off because of safety concerns, and also because effectively overall it was too dangerous to race on the Monza bankings in the future, and it's also because ultimately there was only one guardrail actually holding up the drivers from the bankings, so obviously the Monza bankings were proven, of course, to be too dangerous for Grand Prix racing cars of the future, and oddly enough, the last time they really did race on those Monza bankings was, ironically, 60 years ago, 1961, when the race itself had ultimately decided that year's world champion, which was the American racing driver Phil Hill, although oddly enough the race itself was marred by the death of Wolfgang von Trips, who was notably killed in a collision with Jim Clark in the early stages of the race at Parabolica. The Ferrari collided with the Lotus and went straight into a crowd of 15 spectators above the Parabolica corner. The Ferrari flipped and effectively overall it also claimed the lives of 15 spectators along with Von Trips himself. Essentially proving, of course, how much more dangerous the days of Grand Prix racing were back in the 50s and 60s, also the 70s. And that's all. I really don't think I want to be touching that wall too many times. And it looks as though the field for the rest of this race is pretty much spread out. I mean, the only on-track battle that's actually going on is for floor. the only on-track battle that's actually ongoing up to this point is basically the battle for fourth, but that's it. Because everywhere else is just lame, if I can put it that way. Anyways, 9 laps are down, and still we have a total of 6 laps to go. And then, obviously, I can basically stop my moaning of just waiting to see how long it is before these bankings actually kill me. Which is probably what I anticipate is going to happen if I was racing on these bankings in real life, basically. Anyways. We are halfway through lap 10. The gap is now pretty much 8.2 seconds now to the Mazda. It's fair to say that since I took the lead, I've basically been unchallenged, and it looks as though this is going to once again prove, of course, to be the case. Even though, respectively, I will of course have to return, of course, to my normal downforce setting when time we get over to the 5th race. So we now have just 5 laps to go. 5 more laps of dullness, and then I do not have to come back here. Just having a sip of water so I can keep myself in check. And officially, it looks as though the minimum downforce setting has clearly paid dividends for both myself and the Zonda, because ultimately I literally have no drag whatsoever, or at least the minimum amount of drag I can get out of this car from the downforce, considering I am of course running with a minimum downforce setting. And oddly enough, that has proven to be extremely helpful, and oddly enough at the same time it's also made me extremely competitive. And only about another 20 kilometers away from blowing this engine, because from this point onwards the engine is basically just going to stay red, because reliability for oil changes in this game is poor. Considering obviously we will basically have to deal with the red oil light for pretty much the rest of this race. And because I've now built myself up to enough of an interval to basically stay clear of the Mazda up to this point, I would imagine I pretty much have no competition whatsoever. Right, so 9.1 seconds is now the interval to the Mazda. The rest of the field up to this point has pretty much been strung out except for 4th and 5th positions, because that is the only on-track battle that's still ongoing up to this point. And yes, I am yawning because that is literally how boring this race really is, and it's only a matter of time until my oil light turns red. And obviously that will of course mean that up to this point I would say this is the exact opposite of what I thought was going to happen. Don't mind me, I was just holding in a sneeze that I felt was going to happen. Anyways, 9.3 seconds is now the interval to the Mazda, and the Panos sadly is once again in the pits, although at the very least this probably will be his best finish of the championship overall, because he will still manage to finish in 3rd, and correction, it's before, or just before, 300 miles that we have officially hit the red oil light. Although it won't matter too much, because obviously mechanical failures don't tend to happen in this game very often, and after 186 miles of driving, which is basically what I just did, officially my engine has now blown. Unquestionably, I should say. But it's fine, because we now only have 2 laps to go before I can finally get away from this fucking course. just to basically go anywhere else but this course. Please. And that's a wall. Alright, 2 laps to go, and then once I have completed those 2 laps, I do not have to come back here. And it doesn't matter because the Mazda now comes into the pits after 13 laps, and officially, it now looks as though it is officially going to be 2 very uncompetitive final laps of this race. Also, because furthermore, the Mazda is going to keep hitting the rev limiter, which is exactly how I was able to make the pass for second when once the Pagani basically came in for a fresh set of boots, obviously, that was exactly how I managed to take, unquestionably, a dominant lead. And also furthermore, get used to seeing that red oil light, because we are going to be seeing that a lot more often for the next couple of segments. Is what he thinks. So 31.1 seconds is now the gap to the Mazda. And all I can really say up to this point, because I'm not streaming this live, is, well, domination. Alright, final lap of this fucking race. And even though my lap times are getting slower and slower, the truth is, I do not have to keep up with the dullness for much longer, because we only have 1 lap left, thankfully. And I will literally be so relieved by the time this race is done, because fucking hell. This race overall has been a real bitch because of how long it is, and yeah, it does look as though it's the GT40 that's at the back, and the S2K has now come into the pits after 13 laps, so that's basically 104th position over to the FTO. And the GT40 in this championship, he is going to pretty much be nowhere, is what he thinks. Unless he can manage to come back in the later stages of the championship. But again, it doesn't matter too much to me because officially I am still going to win 4 races in a row, which is basically as long as a NASCAR streak. The most races won consecutively in NASCAR has now been achieved, or at least in the NASCAR Cup Series. Anyways, I win, with a time of 26 minutes and 45 seconds, after 2 uncompetitive final laps. Let's now wait for everyone else to finish. This is going to be a while. Yes! Everyone has finished. And ultimately, as well as that, everyone else also finished on the lead lap. So essentially overall, we all went the full 15 laps. And even though it looked as though I would be close to overlapping the GT40, in the end, unfortunately, I did not. So, the perfect start to this 3-part championship for me, with 4 wins in a row, which is basically the longest consecutive wins in the NASCAR Cup Series, at least in the modern era. The FTO has now moved up to third ahead of the S2000, and the Panos Esperante at the moment is looking like he will hold on to the 5th position over the GT40. And so, that was part 1 of the Professional GT All-Stars, and next time we shall be doing part 2. Stay tuned.